You don't wake to an alarm clock. You wake to brass. The bugle rips a seam in the grey dawn, and the sound is so bright it feels like it's carving your brain into neat little slices. You blink at the canvas overhead. Breath fogs in the cold. The smell in your nostrils is old wool, damp straw, yesterday's salt pork, and a hint of coal smoke that drifted in from the fire line. The canvas roof beads with last night's mist like a blanket of cold sweat. You are Eli Merceratin, if anyone asks. 17, if anyone checks your family Bible in Ohio. Your enlistment paper swears you're of age. Your mother swore you weren't, quietly, in a kitchen after the recruiter left with his drum and his fiery words about union and duty and the eyes of the world watching. Your father said nothing, then pressed into your palm a pocket knife and a folded scrap of scripture. The same way his father did when the Mexicans and the Americans had their argument 2 decades back. Reveille. The sergeant's voice is a rasping saw inside the tent. His silhouette hat, brim like a shelf, moves along the row of bodies, as if he's a dark wave tipping the shore. On your pins, boys. Inspection in 20. Your tent mates stir. Jonah Pike, a mill hand from Cincinnati, coughs until his ribs clip together like loose boards. Owen Hart, who has the quiet hands of a farm boy and a mind that runs like a river, rolls over with the careful precision of someone who woke 3 times to the runs in the night and is bargaining with his insides for 20 more quiet minutes. Somebody mutters a prayer. Somebody else swears at his blanket. You sit up and the straw stabs your back through the thin pallet, as if the earth itself disapproves of your spine. You pull your coat on. The sleeves smell like an ox had a fever in there. Yesterday's drilled dust has stiffened the elbows to bark. Outside the tent flap, the world is a quilt of tents stitched in long, imperfect seams across a Pennsylvania hillside. Heavy boots have churned the topsoil into an all-purpose mud made of rain. Manure, ashes, spilled stew, tobacco spit, and gossip. The camp isn't so much a place as an event happening to the land. You join the line at the kettler black-bellied pot, hanging like a moon above embers. Coffee is the color of a river and tastes like the river's older, meaner cousin. You crush a brick of hardtack against your knee, the crumbles rattling into your tin like hail. When you pour coffee over them, bloated weevils float to the surface like tiny white boats. You flick them out with your pocket knife. Jonah grins. Extra meat, he says. You smile like a man in church who doesn't think the joke is funny but knows it's useful, because laughter is a currency that still spends. Word runs along the line with the fast. Hungry legs of rumor. We're moving south. The syllables crackle. South is not a direction on a compass. South is a shape you can feel. South is where the war is a face you can touch. Across the parade ground, a mule brays like a bent trumpet. An ambulance wagon rattles by, its white canvas marked by a red cross that looks like someone painted a wound with optimism. Inside, a man hacks into a cloth and examines what he's pulled from his chest, the way a farmer will judge a handful of soil. Is it good? Is it bad? Will it grow anything? He meets your eyes and nods a hard, ironic little nod that says, "You're new. The war will teach you the rest." Inspection. The sergeant works down the row. Rifle, bayonet, cartridge box, cap pouch, haversack. He speaks as if reciting the liturgy of a hard church. Your Springfield Model 1861 is a 10-pound truth. You keep your face still when he inspects the bore and says nothing. Praise and scorn sound identical in his voice. When he taps your boot heel, the sole flaps like a fish's mouth. See, the quartermaster, he says, which is Camp 4. So, it yourself drill begins with the sun hauled halfway up by clouds, right dress front. The line settles, shoulders touching like fence rails. You march into the mud river. The heel of your bad boot gulps brown water and coughs it up your calf. You load and fire at the word of command until your fingers wear a grey glove of powder. Bite cartridge, prime, seat the 9 motions by rote. Your mouth bitter with saltpeter, your tongue twice bitten. Corporal Doolin strolls behind like a schoolmaster who never liked school. You can learn to tie a bowline, or you can learn to die. Choose quick. At the noon halt you share a slab of salt pork, so grey it could vanish in fog. The army calls it ration. You call it what keeps you on your feet. Owen tells you, between tiny bites, that his older brother died at Shiloh. He says it the way a man points at distant weather, factual, near enough to respect, far enough, maybe, to survive. He carries a folded letter from home in his blouse pocket. His mother's writing cramped like weeds, eating a fence. After noon comes fatigue, duty fatigue, being the army's poetry for work that does not wish to be done. Today, latrines. It turns out 100 men with shovels is a machine that defeats dignity. Jonah cracks. Never thought my future held digging for the future, and everyone laughs because it's either that or look down and think too hard about the math of disease. You've learned the bitter catechism. Diarrhea kills more than musket balls. A clean trench is a prayer. A covered trench is an answered one in the late light. A photographer sets up near the officers' tents, a magician with a wooden box. The line to his lens snakes across the muddy street. 2 bits for a tin plate, 2 male, 2 worried kitchens. You finger the last coins in your purse and think of your mother's hands, red from cold water, lifting a photograph to the window. You pay, stand stiff in a borrowed coat that fits like honesty, and stare into a lens that smells faintly of alcohol and ghost stories. Hold, the photographer says, and vanishes under his black cloth like a preacher hearing a confession. The powder flares, a small man-made lightning, and for an instant you taste metal and see nothing. Evening, fires begin to dot the camp islands in the dusk. Men gather like moths. Somebody pulls a harmonica from a sock. The tune that comes off it is Home, Sweet Home, which is either a kindness or a cruelty depending on how long you've been away. You open your haversack and remove a letter. The one that rode across 2 states in a mailbag that also carried bullets. Your mother's handwriting lifts off the page in little loops of worry and order. Your father's cough is better. The cow calved early. Pastor Graves says not to keep your socks damp. Your little sister Ruth put a drawing in here somewhere. They're 2 figures holding a flag with the wrong number of stars. You fold the picture like a saint and slide it into your cap pouch. Close against the leather. Mercer, the sergeant barks, passing by. You ever fired that rifle at a live target? No, Sergeant. He nods, once. Tomorrow you'll learn what else it can do. You lie down on straw that has already learned the shape of your spine. The canvas breathes. The camp settles. Frogs start their patient work of singing the night into being. Somewhere a man dreams out loud, and it is not of marching. When sleep comes, it is a dark river, swift and cold. You go under and do not fight it. Morning will have teeth. You will need whatever rest you can steal. Asterisk, the sky is the color of tin. The bugle's edge is duller today. Or maybe that's your mind trying to wrap itself in cloth. Formed by companies. You shoulder your kit, knapsack with spare shirt, blanket roll, half a tent, frying pan banging your tailbone like a bad joke, cartridge box across your belly, cap pouch on your belt, canteen slapping your hip with the annoying devotion of a small dog. 40 rounds issued, and they weight more than their ounces. The column extends like a river, blue water flowing south. Flags at intervals stitch the whole into one thing the way the spine stitches a body. The drum is not music. It's a metronome for bone and will. Guide center. The pace is 3 miles an hour for the first mile, then the road gets a vote. Ruts arranged like trapdoors. Mud with opinions. Stones that enjoy knees. At first the men sing because men are fools and brave in the first mile. John Brown's Body, battle cry of freedom, songs that somehow sound better when you haven't yet earned them. By the second hour, singing turns to breath, and breath turns to bargaining. You stop listening to your feet so you can keep using them. Owen walks beside you, quiet. He carries to canteens his, and Jonah's because Jonah's cough has gone deep and hard. It takes a special kind of friend to carry another man's water. Every 10 minutes, the officers' horses shift from side to side as if impatience were a communicable disease. The road takes you past farms that try not to look at you and never quite succeed. A woman in a doorway with her arms folded across a stomach that is either full of child or habit. 2 boys in bare feet counting soldiers aloud until an uncle cuffs them playfully and points them toward the barn. A fence half missing where someone took rails for cooking, for barricades, for warmth. Even the air seems shaved, tight with everything armies do to a county when they pass. Asterisk. Near noon, you smell the guns before you hear them. A peppery, metallic ghost in the wind. Then the dull, far thump of artillery, like God closing drawers in a distant room. The word moves back along the column on boot leather and dread. Skirmish ahead. Men who were 15 minutes ago thinking about pie are now thinking about their own hearts. The first wagon comes toward you with wheels that squeal like old pigs. The white canvas roof bears the red cross, but red can't promise much today. Inside, men boy sit or lie in attitudes the body usually keeps for sleep. Bandages like clouds around heads, shoulders, arms. One man sits at the tailgate, his sleeve tied off above an empty air, where an arm kept its promises for 20 years. He holds a small Bible. His eyes meet yours, and he nods once. It is not courage, exactly, that you see there. It is the absence of patience. "Keep your dressing," says Corporal Doolin. Eyes front. You look to the side anyway, because you are not a machine. A second wagon lurches by, a third. After a while, you stop counting because you are not the sort of person you want to be. If you can count that high without losing parts of yourself you may need. Later, an hour later, the column halts near a stream whose water dreams of being clean. The order is 15 minutes for coffee and canteens, which is to say 9 minutes for hustling and 6 minutes for standing in a half shade thinking of nothing. Jonah drops beside you, unlaces his boots with a groan that is equal parts prayer and complaint. The skin on his heel has the delicate look of a peeled fruit. Owen produces a small tin of something that smells like the wrong end of a sheep. Grease, he explains. Beeswax, tallow. A teamster told me it's what separates veterans from fools. He passes it around. When you rub it into your raw place, it burns like truth and then goes quiet as a promise kept. The 15 minutes is 7 in the end. Fall in. The sergeant might as well be pulling a bell rope. You stand, and the world spins once to remind you that food and water are ideas as well as things. Then you're in the river again, moving with thousands of men toward a bend no one has seen. Mud swallows a shoe for ranks ahead. A private goes down on both knees and laughs like a man remembering the wrong punchline. Two comrades haul him out by the armpits. He will be the funniest man in camp tonight. A line of ambulances is parked in the shade of a sycamore. A surgeon in a blood-stained apron smokes a pipe, as if the pipe is what stands between him and the long fall. A stretcher rests nearby, and on it a boy whose freckles look like a map of better places. You think, he is younger than me. Then you think the thing men think when there is not enough softness in the world to hold what's being asked. Keep walking. The road climbs toward a low ridge. Even the mules breathe hard. Beyond, the sounds of small musketry begin cracks and pops like a forest teaching a lesson to a storm. Skirmishers forward. The flutter in your belly is not entirely fear. It is electricity. The line ahead shakes out into a wider ribbon. Your company angles right. Officers murmur to each other in a language that is mostly angles and willpower. The flag dips and rises like a ship on a gentle ocean you don't trust. Colonel Latham rides past, his jaw clenched into a sermon. Steady, boys. We relieve the line and hold. He wears the face of a man who learned last month that not all plans survive the first handshake with the enemy. On the ridge, you finally see it. A green valley with a creek drawn across it in honest blue. Beyond the water, a wood line where shadows are moving like ideas with knives. Between you and the creek, open ground, chopped up earth, and a scattering of shapes so still you don't want to name them. The batteries behind you unfold like tin toys into thunder. Fix bayonets, Captain Pierce calls. His voice a rung on a ladder. Your blade clicks into place with the soft, private sound of a decision you cannot unmake. You stand in the first rank, because you are tall and because the sergeant put his hand on your shoulder this morning and pushed you half a step forward. And you didn't argue because that felt like the same as volunteering. Owen breathes beside you. Jonah coughs once, the cough of a man who will get letters for months about how he ought to take. Onions in his socks and arsenic in special amounts and never sleep on damp. Ground as if there were a third option between damp and dead. Hold your fire. The line out there in grey is not a line yet, but something is making it one. The first shell lands to your right. It throws up a fan of dirt and a piece of fence rail that spins end over end like a baton. Someone cries out with a voice that starts high and ends where voices don't usually go. Your hands go cold and then hot, and then you are a furnace that manufactures only now, ready. You bring the rifle to your shoulder. The barrel is an unwieldy promise, talking directly to your cheekbone. Aim. The world compresses into the open field and the blur behind it. You can pick out a flag with a blue cross and stars, and some part of you notices the design the way a carpenter notices a joint. Fire. The line speaks in one voice. Smoke leaps up in a sheet the color of sour milk, and suddenly the world is half a room. Your right shoulder thumps with the recoil, and your cheek feels the heat like a kiss from a stove that loves you but has never been taught how to show it. Before the echo finishes saying its name, your hands are already biting, pouring, ramming, capping. You are not thinking words, only verbs. Load, aim, fire. The enemy answers. Bullets hum past like big insects. One bites the dirt at your boot and throws stinging grit into your sock. You don't flinch because there is nowhere to flinch to. Men fall. Not many in the first volleys. This is a game of long odds played out loud, but enough to teach you the rules. A private to your left sinks as if the earth has decided to practice mercy by stealing him early. Corporal Doolan swears, not as a man angry at a thing, but as a man making a sound, so the universe won't be quiet yet. The line in grey keeps coming, and you understand something vicious and simple. They are you wearing other colours. Their faces are also made of fear and stubbornness, and an idea someone taught at the kitchen table. You load, aim, fire, until your tongue is a lump of metal in your mouth and your shoulder is a drum. Then the order you did not expect: cease firing. Forward, bayonets. Time crosses its arms and waits to see what you'll do. Up and over. The captain yells. The wall, the stub fence, whatever you'd been hiding behind is suddenly behind you, and the ground is open and alive with things that want you. You move because Owen moves, because the man on your right roars like a man who wants to hear his own voice more than he wants to think about what his legs are doing. Because you can't not. You don't remember the next 60 seconds. They will come back later as bright, cruel clips. The feel of the bayonet catching in something you will not name and then freeing. A hat flying off a head and the head staying. The ground sloping and your foot failing to find it and then finding it again. The hot breath of someone so close you know something about what he ate for breakfast. The total absence of music. When the smoke's edge lifts and the world shows you a picture, you are on your knees and your hands are black. Owen is there, his chest rising in short, furious puffs. Jonah is not. Your stomach drops a floor. Then a cough behind you, familiar and stubborn. I am not dying in a field, Jonah says, to nobody, to God, to the cough itself. You almost laugh. You do not. Back to the ridge. Orders travel on horseback and profanity. You discover the specific kind of gratitude that belongs to a man told to retreat before he has gotten the chance to misplace himself permanently. You backpedal with your bayonet out like a warning, your heart big in your throat. And then the line behind folds you into itself and the shooting becomes a long, savage conversation from safer distances. Dusk arrives like a wet cloak. The grey line slides back into the trees. The ridge stays in Union blue. Men move quickly across the battlefield with stretchers and quiet mouths. The chaplain grips a canteen and a scrap of prayer that he measures out as if it were whiskey from a small flask. You sit beside Owen behind a low stone wall that will be in your dreams for years. Your hands shake so hard you can't pour coffee. Owen takes the cup and pours for both of you, steady as a winter sky. Still with me, he says. You nod because words are exhausted. Tomorrow, he adds, and you don't ask whether that's a threat, a promise, or a simple fact like weather. Night foxes into the fields. Somewhere a wounded man calls for his mother until he falls asleep or into something else. The stars burn above it all, arrogant and unconcerned. And you think it is possible, somehow, that they shone exactly like this when nobody was killing anybody. That thought is a kind of sacrament. You drink it down and sleep where you sit. Asterisk. Morning's first gift is the taste of ash. You woke in your clothes, which means you slept. Your right shoulder feels hammered. Your throat is a salted road. Owen's face is greyer than yesterday's sky. Jonah looks better because he says he does. Orders: hold the ridge. Send details for water and wood. Dispatch a party to the field to bring in the worst of the wounded, the way fishermen pull nets to save what can be saved and honor what can't. You draw stretcher duty. The battlefield looks different at walking pace. In daylight, less like a theater, more like a barn after a storm, with everything the storm decided to remember strewn for proof. You and a corporal you don't know find a boy in grey propped against a stump. He wears a wedding ring that shines like a coin. His breath is small. Water? He asks, and he read your face before you read his. You tip your canteen to his mouth. Thank you, he says, not as enemy or friend, but as a person. You've been alive long enough to recognize the difference. When you lift him to the stretcher, his ring scrapes against your knuckle and your whole life fits inside that sound for half a second. Back at the hospital line, surgeons move in an ugly choreography. Cut, clamp, wipe, stitch. Their hands are slick. Their eyes are so tired they can't afford to blink. The pile of limbs beside the tent is taller than the surgeon, and you file the fact away because you will either scream now or find a way to make it into a story later. A boy from Vermont grips your sleeve as you pass and says, "Tell Ma, I ate regular." You promise because promise is the last coin you can still spend. You return to the ridge shaking. The quartermaster's tent sits like a vendor at a cruel fair. He's a thin man who could hide behind his own ledger. Need boots, you say, lifting your right foot to show the flat-mouthed sole. He peeps at it as if examining a beetle. Inventory says we're oversupplied with boots, private. Therefore, we are, by definition, not out of boots. The logic grins. You do not. Then I will accept the definition of a pair, you say. Not because you are bold, but because you are too tired to be scared of this species of officer. He searches your face for sarcasm like a prospector. Finding none, or something like none, he sighs and disappears into the stacks. He returns with a pair 2 sizes too big and an expression 2 sizes too pleased with itself. Stuff them with paper, he says. The army's secret is paper. You take them. They smell like tanned animal in the future. At midday, a male orderly moves down the line like a parade of small mercies. He calls names with a voice that can be heard over fire, over wind, over grief. Mercer, you stand and your hands already know how to hold an envelope, as if your life is a jar and the letter is what you pour into it to keep it from losing shape. Your mother writes about butter, about a neighbor's cow that went dry, about Mrs. Holcomb's boy courting a girl you don't like, about Pastor Graves again with his opinions about socks and sin and the proper way to boil coffee. She writes about the new well handle and how it cuts your palm if you're not cautious. She does not write about fear. You can read the fear anyway. It's in the spaces. She signs with a flourish. Your father's letter is smaller. The corn is stunted. The river jumped its banks and filled the lower lot like a stubborn sermon. Remember your granddad in Mexico, he said. The trick is to follow orders, and when orders are wrong, follow mercy. If the two agree, you've done something a man can live with. Your mother sends love, and so do I. He does not mention tears because the men of your family write about weather when they mean weather, and everything else you write back. You tell them the food is regular, and the coffee is strong, both true on some days. You do not mention the pile by the hospital or the ring scraping your knuckle. You tell Ruth that her drawing kept the rain off the powder in your cartridge box. You fold the letter and a thin slice of yourself with it. At dusk, there's a quiet you've begun to distrust. Officers hold their heads together and share bad news in a dialect made of whispers and maps. We move at dawn, Captain Pierce says to the line, his voice even. 10 miles, maybe more. Light packs. full canteens. Men groan in 4 languages and then begin quietly arranging their few objects into the geometry that will hurt least over distance. You tie your new boots extra tight and fill the paper gaps with yesterday's Richmond Examiner, the enemy's words, emptied of anger, making your steps quieter. Sleep is a wall you lean against, not a bed you lie in. The night is thin. A man screams from the field, and the sound climbs your spine and sets up its tent at the base of your skull. Night terrors, Owen murmurs. My uncle had them after Buena Vista, woke the house with them, woke the neighbors. You think suddenly about how the war will echo in the places it doesn't reach, how the war will keep singing after the bands go home. You want to be the kind of man who can hold that thought in daylight without breaking. A chaplain drifts past like a coat on legs and offers a prayer that feels less like a public statement and more like a hand on a shoulder. Hold fast. You are surprised by how much you want that to be enough. Part 4. South by Sweat, a day that makes a Dawn is a coin somebody drops, and you find it by sound. Fall in. The column is narrower today, the ground less interested in being walked upon. The sun decides, an hour in, to test what men are made of. Later you will describe this sun to people who weren't there, and they will nod politely and nod. Understand, your canteen turns from cool friend to warm apology. You ration sips as if your mouth is a poorly kept account book. Owen watches you and does the same, and you love him a little for it. Jonah's cough has less knife in it this morning, more broom. He makes a joke about his lungs being a pair of old bellows, and everyone laughs because everybody wants to be the person who can laugh about lungs after 3 hours. The road lifts its mask and shows its true face. A slick clay cut by thousands of hooves and wheels into wounds. Mules strain and slide. Teamsters cuss in iambic pentameter. You pass a place where a fence is entirely gone, and the posts stand like teeth in a mouth that forgot how to chew. A child on a gatepost, barefoot, brown-haired, Ferrell counts you with a solemnity usually reserved for courtrooms and funerals. His mother stands behind him with a baby on her hip, the baby wrapped in a quilt made from a dress someone loved 5 years ago. She nods at you and you nod back, and your exchange contains a book's worth of opinions about this war. At a crossroads near a dry well, men from the Sanitary Commission hand out small gifts from women who organize kindness the way generals organize war. Socks, pickles, coarse sugar in paper twists, dried apples. You take an apple slice that tastes like a particularly well-organized autumn. Artillery to the front. Horses with shoulders made of willpower thunder past, guns bumping behind them like angry children. The air changes, and you learn a new weather. The pressure that arrives when armies pull their focus tight like a belt. The hill ahead is not cruel, in the way mountains are cruel. It is cruel the way a long staircase is cruel when you're carrying someone else's furniture. At the crest you see again, and never for the last time, the geometry of a fight the way a carpenter sees a frame before the house exists. A creek cutting the valley, a wood beyond, an open field that might as well have a sign. Here men will pay. Your regiment forms on the ridge. Battery crews work around you with domestic efficiency swab, load, run the piece up, sight, fire. The cannon speaks and the ground hums like a struck bell everyone can hear with their knees. You find that the fear in your chest has a new neighbor, a bright, sharp thing that might be eagerness and might be the body's silly way of wanting proof it's still alive. Grey shapes appear at the tree line. They are ragged in the way scarecrows are ragged, on purpose and indifferent. A flag rises. Somewhere a rebel yell begins high and wild, like a joke told by a man who never learned where to stop. The sound is not supernatural. It is a human noise, and that is worse. Hold, Captain Pierce doesn't shout. He says it in the tone your father used when a calf had its head stuck in the fence and you needed to be clever, not fast. Hold now. Your volley crashes out. The smoke throws a curtain over the valley, and you have to imagine your bullets long ride into a man who is also imagining his. You load again, and your hands move with the speed they learned yesterday, but are already pretending they've known for years. The line in grey doesn't break. It ripples and becomes different and comes on. You fire and fire until the word fire loses its meaning. A rebel bullet knocks the brass tip off your ramrod, and the impact kisses your knuckles hard enough to make you see a quick museum of your childhood sunlight in the barn dust. Your sister's chalk on the doorstep, your mother laughing with a hand over her mouth, as if joy were a private thing. Down. A shell lands short and throws dirt over you and Owen in a heavy, disgusted sheet. You stand, and you are both the same men and not. Owen's face is striped with clean wear, sweat made rivers, and grey where powder climbed into his pores and set up a homestead. Still with me, he says again. He will say it 1,000 times. The words will stitch you. The grey tide reaches the creek and tries to cross on stones and fallen logs. Your battery drops shell after shell into that churn. A cannonball skips once on water like a heavy boy's rock and then becomes a red flower on the far bank. You think, if I live, I will spend years trying not to think about this exact moment while washing potatoes and fixing gates and listening to rain on a porch roof. The thought leaks away because there is a charge at your front. Make ready. The grey line surges uphill, thinner now, angrier. Pick your men. The sergeant yells. You do not pick. You aim at the center of a shirt and not the face above it, because you do not have the moral instruments for faces at this range. You fire. The man goes down. He does not look at you. You reload, and the powder spills because your hand is shaking, and then it isn't, because something inside has decided to be a machine for 10 more minutes. The line never reaches your wall. Not because of your one bullet. Not because of any one thing any one man did. Because the batteries behind you, and the rifles beside you, and the long, terrible calculus of distance and powder decide in your favor for 1 hour and against those men who had breakfast and sisters and potkneves too. When it is over, it is not over. Ammunition up. Runners move along the ridge with boxes that knock their thighs. Water for the wounded. You empty your canteen into a stranger's mouth, and he smiles like it is a joke only you understand. Bring rails. You steal fence to turn into law. In 20 minutes, you have a breastwork good enough to condescend to, and the arrogance that comes with it. Jonah returns from the hospital line with news that is not news. Men die. Men live. Men lose parts and names, and gain scars and superstitions. He has a hard candy he doesn't remember getting, and he splits it with you and Owen, and the sugar hits like a hymn. The sun leans west, and the thunder dies to mutters. You sit with your back to the wall, and your rifle across your knees, and try to teach your hands to be hands again. Owen produces a pencil stub and an envelope, and begins a letter to his mother, speaking the words before he lays them down, as if that will teach them manners. Tell her, he says to you, that I keep my feet dry. Tell her the coffee is hot. She will know what the truth is in there. You nod. Tell mine that Pastor Graves is wrong about socks, you say, and Owen smiles in a small, private way. Only men who have seen a pile of limbs and eaten a hard candy 10 minutes later know how to smile. Night finds you on watch for the first half. The valley looks stitched shut under moonlight. Fireflies write nonsense poems over the old fence lines. Somewhere out there, a man hums a tune he hasn't sung since his wedding. The wind fits itself into the trees like a thought you do not have time to have. Mercer, the sergeant says softly behind you. Good work. It is not quite praise. It is mostly permission to keep breathing. You do. Asterisk dawn is a pale coin, thin and chipped. The ridge holds. The enemy pulled back to the tree line in the night, leaving the field between you like a ledger page with blood for ink. Orders come down like tired prayers. Detail for burial. Detail for prisoners. Detail for wood and water. You are picked for the first, and you think, there are jobs men do because somebody has to. And then there are jobs men do because the world must go on being a world, even when it doesn't want to. You move out in pairs, with shovels that feel heavier than rifles and blankets that will become stretchers. The sun lifts slow and finds what men tried to misplace under the moon. The sprawl of bodies where the lines surged and folded back. The dark stains that dried to black maps. A shoe here without a foot, as if it simply forgot its partner and walked off in shame. Crows hop with the rude entitlement of landlords. They eye you as if you owe rent. The first man you roll is a boy in butternut cloth who still has the trace of peach on his jaw. He looks surprised in death, the way many do, as if the world took a corner too fast. His hand grips a little badge with a painted heart, his sweetheart's token, bright red against the dust. You loosen his fingers, and for a moment it feels like you're asking permission. We'll see it gets sent, you say, without being asked to promise. And the corporal from Vermont next to you nods because he knows that some oaths don't get written down, but count the most. You dig in teams of 4. To shovel, one lifts, one reads. Reading is the hardest part. There are letters in pockets, names on scraps of cloth sewn inside caps, penciled cards tucked in a sock. J. Tomlinson, 3rd Alabama. Charles Reed, 19th Maine. W. Price, 7th Georgia. You say them aloud and bow your head, and the act makes the air warmer for a second. When there's no name, you pull something, a button, a coin, a small penknife, and wrap it in a scrap of shirt to send to a place you'll never see. A man ought to be somebody to somebody when the dirt covers him. The chaplain moves among the details with a book that looks too small for the work at hand. He says a verse now and then, and the words fall without a sound you can hear. But it does something anyway, like laying a hand on a frantic horse's neck and feeling the tremble calm half a shade. At midday, the prisoner detail crosses your field of view. A string of grey-clad men with faces older than their years. Guarded by boys with rifles they hold like questions. The Confederates' eyes are hollow with the special tide that comes after courage spends itself. One man with a red beard, as bright as a fox, stops and points at a blue body. "Cousin," he rasps. "Wasn't supposed to be here." You look where he points and see a sprawled Yankee sergeant missing his cap, his hair oddly gilded by dust. The guard glances at you and the bearded prisoner. After a pause that contains a rule book and the whole sum of mercy learned in kitchens, he says, 1 minute. The red-bearded man kneels, touches the dead sergeant's shoulder, and bows his head. Then he rises, nods to the guard, and goes on. There are wars, inside wars. Some you don't talk about. You simply do them right. The afternoon heat turns the field into a waiting room for disease. You move faster, your shovel a metronome. A surgeon passes by with sleeves rolled to the elbow, his apron stiff and brown. He stops at a body with a bandaged thigh and shakes his head, one's habit more than judgments, than points to privates. Toward a wounded man you hadn't seen in the grass. The wounded man's eyes open when you lift him. It hurts, he says, in the tone of a man discussing the price of nails. I believe you, you answer, and he smiles as if you'd just told him a new joke he hadn't heard in years. By evening, the pits are covered and mounded, the names recorded in a cautious book. A detail lays fence rails in rows, grave markers for men who were husbands yesterday and will be stories tomorrow. You wash your hands in the creek and watch the water carry away what the day put on your skin. It does not take everything, but it takes enough to let you eat. That night, the camp is a quieter animal. Men sit and do not talk about what their hands did. Jonah, who can't keep from wisecracking if you paid him not to, says nothing at all. Owen cleans his rifle with a tenderness you've seen him give a calf with a weak leg. Captain Pierce makes the rounds with a canteen of something stronger than coffee. He offers you a swallow and you take it, coughing when it burns. First burial detail, he asks. You nod. It never gets easy, he says. If it does, you've lost a thing you won't get back. You lie on your blanket and stare up. The stars are so sharp you could cut cloth with them. Your father once told you that men look up because the ground is always the same, but the sky is honest about change. Tonight, you think, the sky is also honest about not caring. Then you think about a red beard bowing over a blue coat and decide maybe caring is our job. Morning brings prisoner exchange. A flag of truce flutters down near the creek-white cotton on a stick, miraculous in its simplicity. Men in blue and grey approach with their hands open, officers stepping between them like chaperones at a dance neither side enjoys. A cart rolls forward with bread and a barrel of coffee that must have come from the quartermaster's personal heaven. There is talk about numbers and names, about who has whom and who might be returned despite the lack of papers, because a man's face is paper if you've seen it enough times. You stand with a detail to escort the traded men to the rear. One of the grey-clad prisoners looks at your boots and says, "Too big." You grin. "Paper fixes everything," you tell him. He barks a laugh that's mostly cough. "Paper fixes nothing where I'm headed," he says, but he's not cruel about it. You offer him a piece of hard candy from a sanitary commission parcel someone slipped you. He refuses, then takes it. "For my boy," he adds. "If I get as far as home, in the afternoon, the band plays." It seems an obscenity and a mercy at once. The first tune is "The Girl I Left Behind Me," which makes a corporal from Indiana cry in an angry way that promises violence to anyone who mentions it. The second is a hymn, slow and certain. By the third, men are humming along and you realize something. Sound reclaims ground. Where the day took things from you, the music gives something back, even if it's only the right to breathe all the way into your back. That night, letters. Paper is a miracle even when it doesn't fix anything. You write to your mother about fences and kindness and the chaplain's small book. You do not mention the pile by the hospital or how long a man's arm looks when it's not attached to a man. You ask after Pastor Graves' he had the gout hand. You tell Ruth to keep drawing stars, any number she wants. You sign your son, Eli, and press the envelope flat like a leaf in a Bible. Before sleep, Owen speaks into the near. Do you think the men we buried today knew someone would say their names? You turn on your elbow. I don't know, you answer. But we did. He nods in the way a man nods when he can't admit he was hoping for a different answer and finds he can live with this one. The bugle for lights out is softer than usual. Or maybe the day made it that way. You sleep, and your sleep is thick with the work of forgetting only as much as will allow tomorrow to happen. Asterisk. The army marches on its stomach and falls sick by its water. That's a thing, an old sergeant says in passing one morning, and you file it away as if it was scripture. 2 weeks after the ridge fight, the regiment settles into a low meadow shaped like a bowl and quickly becomes exactly what a bowl would become if 12,000 men ate, slept, bled, coughed, and relieved themselves inside it. The quartermaster says the sight is fine. The surgeon says the sight is a sin. The quartermaster has a ledger. The surgeon has eyes. Dysentery arrives the way weather does everywhere at once, despite or because of the latrines you dug by the book. 100 men line up outside the hospital tent, faces drawn down like windows in a storm. The air is full of the smell nobody can describe graciously, so men turn soldiers' poetry loose on it and call it camp perfume and worse. You learn to boil everything: coffee, gossip, even the water you rinse your spoon in. The order, no washing above the water point, becomes as holy as the 10 Commandments. Still, men double over with cramps that look like stab wounds from the inside. You dig new trenches anyway. You sprinkle lime like a farmer throws seed and hope for a different harvest. In the hospital tent, you meet chloroform. Not for yourself yet, thanks to luck, obedience, and a healthy respect for staying behind a fence until told to cross it. You're on water detail when they bring in Private Gaines from Company C with a leg like a thunderstruck sapling, the bone splintered by a ball, the blood stubborn. Dr. Abernathy, his name stitched neat on a patch, his sleeves rolled to reveal scarred forearms, puts a cone over Gaines' face and drips chloroform with the care of a mother pouring molasses. Too fast and it kills. Too slow and the man remembers more of this than any human ought to. Count backwards from 100, Abernathy says, and by 80 Gaines is in a sea where nothing hurts. The saw is a bright thing, the nurse is a blur of competent hands. The stump neatly dressed before you have finished your second trip for water. 15 minutes to trade a leg for a life. The numbers don't add up in any moral arithmetic, but they balance in this tent, and that's what you have. The nurses are angels and drill sergeants both. Some are men in aprons with the 1,000-yard stare of people who know where hell's pantry is. Some are women who came with the sanitary commission or from nowhere with a will like iron under velvet. One Mrs. Calder feeds broth to a vomit-slick boy with a patience only mothers and saints carry in their pockets, then turns and scolds a corporal for spitting where clean linen dries. "Do you want to kill your friend?" she asks. "No, ma'am," the corporal says, and actually means it. Vaccination teams move through the companies with lancets that promise smallpox will be a letter you don't receive. The line of sleeves is a parade of pale arms, scabbed old scars, and new bravado. Jonah whispers an elaborate fear of needles in such extravagant detail that you laugh out loud and then roll up your sleeve first. The lance pinches. The keepers of the book write your name. You're marked for a lesser sickness later and grateful in advance. There are other plagues. Typhus rides on lice like a general on a fast horse. Men scratch until they draw blood, then scratch more because some battles can't be won, only endured. A corporal boils his shirt for the 3rd time this week and announces, I'm eating with my shirt now. It's the cleanest thing I own. No one laughs, because the joke is only halfway a joke. Food is better than it was, and worse. The commissary sends barrels of salt pork that taste like brined rope unless you coerce them in a pan with coffee and sugar. The hardtack is either a roof tile or soft as sign depending on the weather, but always somehow full of life that shouldn't be living in bread. Owen shows a trick with fire and a nail to toast the squares until the weevils flee like sinners from a sermon. Someone receives a box from home with onions. The smell alone makes men weep. Raw onion on pork is a feast in this economy. You carve order out of a place that doesn't want it. Company streets are raked. Trash pits are dug and actually used. Water is hauled from upstream, and for once nobody cheats because cheating makes graves. The colonel walks the lines with the surgeon, and where the surgeon points, the colonel's cane taps the ground like punctuation. Here, there, more. Dr. Abernathy lectures on latrines to a crowd of grown men as if they were schoolboys who forgot recitation. Nobody argues. Too many have watched friends shrink to nothing on a blanket. The worst week, Jonah collapses with a fever that makes his bones look like they're trying to leave his skin. He shakes so hard the cot chatters. You and Owen take turns wiping him with water that feels cold to your fingers and tepid to his burning skin. He murmurs apologies to his dead father for being late to chores, apologizes to the sergeant for missing roll call, apologizes to the Almighty in gasped fragments for things no one should apologize for. The laudanum bottle counts the hours by drops. Mrs. Calder checks his pulse like a metronome. "Hold on," she orders, like a general. Jonah does. On the third morning, the fever breaks as fast as a summer squall, and he falls into a clean, slumping sleep that looks like mercy. When he wakes, he eats a spoonful of beans and declares them the finest food ever grown. You all laugh, then the heart. Relieved laugh you give a man who came back from the edge with dirt under his nails from hanging on Sunday's Bring Chapel. Attendance isn't quite compulsory, but the sergeant's eyebrow makes a stronger argument than sin. The chaplain preaches short because he understands men standing too long will go places in their heads that make the sermon crueler than intended. He reads psalms about valleys and shadows, and a rod and a staff that comfort. And you don't think about the rod so much as the staff, because a staff is a thing a man leans on when a road is too long. You sing Rock of Ages, some because they mean it, some because singing is breath in one place with other men, which is good medicine. An army trader sets up a sutler's tent like a small, wicked heaven. He sells canned peaches to men who would pay a finger for fruit, and asks prices that make you miss the quartermaster. You buy a pencil and 2 sheets of paper because letters are not luxury. You write your mother that you're well, which is a way of calling a man with 1 boot shod. You tell her water is boiled, socks are dry, prayers are said. You add a line to your father. Your advice about mercy keeps landing in front of me like a fence post in tall grass. I keep walking into it. I think that means I'm using it. You enclose a pressed clover you found by the creek, and wonder whether it will arrive whole, and whether anything does. On a Tuesday with clear sky and thin wind, a photographer returns the same man who captured your stiff, brave-boned portrait months ago, or his cousin, or the idea of him. He asks the surgeon's tent for permission to take a picture. Dr. Abernathy refuses. At first it feels indecent. He says but, then relents on the conditioned faces of the grievously wounded not be shown. The image he makes is a square of ordinary heartbreak, a nurse's back, a man on a cot with his hand out to no one, A line of laudanum bottles, like a regiment of sleep. When he removes his black cloth, he looks older by years. People need to see, he says, not to anyone or to everyone. By late month, the camp smells cleaner and coughs less. The ditch line actually drains after a night of rain. A cricket resumes its honest work behind your tent, as if it has been waiting for the army to remember nature is not the enemy. You feel stronger, thinner, and older in a way that doesn't show in a mirror but lives in your bones. Orders finally come. Break camp at dawn. Men cheer because motion is a tonic and because staying alive in one place too long makes you imagine what you'll miss somewhere else. You roll your blanket, sharpen your bayonet without thinking about why, and fill your canteen at a spot so far upstream it might be Canada. As Taps drifts over the meadow, you think about all the ways you nearly learned the wrong lesson here. And you think about all the little lessons that will keep you breathing. Don't drink from the creek after the mule. For God's sake, dry your socks. When a woman with a nurse's hands tells you to sleep, sleep, asterisk. The column heads north under a sky that finally decided to be generous. You pass farms that haven't yet been bitten, fences that still stand as if for pride. The men walk lighter even under the same weight, because direction matters in the heart more than in the map. Rumor flies elbow to elbow with you. Lee is moving. No, he isn't. Yes, he is. He's already in Pennsylvania. He's turned back. He's split his forces. He's become a ghost and a hurricane, both. You learn to nod at rumor like you'd nod at a loud relative. Affection without belief. 3 days in, your brigade is detailed to guard a supply train through a market town that smells like yeast and horse. Washington isn't far now in miles or gossip. Civilians watch you march past with faces that are like open windows, nothing hidden. A girl of 10 holds up a handful of violets and then loses her nerve. And you walk over and take them like you're being handed a medal. She beams as if you were the only soldier in America. You tuck the violets into your hatband and find they change the weight of everything by a hair. A bell rings. It's not the bugle. It's a church. The note climbs over the rooftops and hangs there, bright and clean. For an instant, you see your Ohio church like a clear picture. Wooden pews with a squeak. Your mother's hand flat on the hymnal, the way Pastor Graves always cleared his throat like a pistol cocking. The army keeps walking. You keep walking. The bell rings behind you and disappears at the edge of town. The U.S. Sanitary Commission has set up a tent that looks like a fair. A sign reads, "Soldiers welcome." The words are such simple manner, you almost cry in a way that would embarrass you later. Inside are tables with things that ought not to exist in a war. Pie satchel, pie swith lattice. Jars of preserves lined up like officers. Stacks of shirts with buttons that match. Women with faces as stern and kind as the north wind move among the men, measuring them by eye for a better shirt, ladling soup like a sacrament, scolding gently about washing and writing home. One takes your elbow and steers you to a chair. "You look peaked," she says. "Eat this and write your mother at the same time, and I'll get you a shirt that won't shame you in daylight." You obey. The pie is apple. The crust shatters like a good secret. You write your mother in the smell of cinnamon and the murmur of women doing the country's work without asking if the country notices. A small stage in the corner hosts a fiddle and a piano. The fiddler is a soldier with a half-healed scar on his cheek. The pianist, a woman in a blue dress with sleeves rolled for work. They strike up Shenandoah, and for the first time in months you hear the song as something besides geography. Men hum, then sing, and the tent holds the sound like a loaf holds heat. For a span that might be 5 minutes or a lifetime, nobody is a private or a colonel or a widow or a nurse. Everyone is a person who knows how a river runs when you're not trying to cross it under fire. Back on the street, a bookseller opens crates onto a table, grim pamphlets about the war, fat novels about anything but Bibles by the bale. Owen picks up a slim book of poems and turns it over like a strange tool. "I'll buy this if you promise to make fun of me for it," he says. "Deal," you answer. He pays and slips it inside his blouse as if it's a bottle. Washington appears on the horizon like a promise in marble. You have a day's pass distributed like candy by a sergeant in a charitable mood, and 3 names on a scrap in your pocket. A cousin in Georgetown who keeps a shop, nobody will say what kind. The address of a soldier's home where a man can sleep on a bed for a dime. And the quartermaster depot where rumor says a man named Wilkins, that Wilkins from the neighboring brigade, the one who told you a dirty joke 3 months ago and then vanished into pneumonia, was sent on light duty. You and Owen step into the city with careful wonder, like 2 barn cats testing a parlor rug. Streets crowded with wagons, men in suits whose buttons could buy your regiment coffee for a month. Ladies with parasols and eyes that can tell the difference between a lieutenant's straps and a private's blouse at 30 yards. You eat in a restaurant where the waiter calls you sir and doesn't even sound like he's joking. The beef is real and bleeds, and you do not apologize to it at the depot. You find Wilkins in an office with barrels to the ceiling and a cough that still owns part of his chest. He looks like a scarecrow someone put a clean shirt on and decided to keep. When he sees you, he whoops and then wheezes and then laughs until he sits down, because laughing standing up is a luxury he can't afford. "Look at you," he says, taking in your face the way a man takes in a good field with rain on it. "And you didn't die like an idiot. Not for want of trying," you tell him. He shows you his desk, forms, stamps, ledgers. "I'm a general now," he declares. "General of beans." He hands you each a tin of peaches squirreled, away from the sutler with the conspiratorial air of a boy raiding an orchard. You sit together against barrels and eat peaches cold out of a can, juice on your chin. And it feels like the United States is winning on this small square of floor, if nowhere else. Evening brings gaslight and the smell of river. You walk with Owen across the mall that will be something someday, but for now is mostly dirt and ambition. You pass the hospital ward where men's faces float in lamplight like moons, and you look away, because you can't not look and you can't keep looking either. A preacher on a corner calls down fire on gamblers, and a gamester in a bright vest tips his hat and keeps dealing. The city is a carnival and a crucible and a ledger, like every place men gather to pretend they're not fragile back at the soldier's home. You sleep on a bed that springs a little and feel like a traitor to the ground you've been courting. You wake twice because silence is too loud. In the morning, you write your mother from a table where dozens of men write their mothers and wives and sweethearts at once. So much love condensed into one room. It might lighten the river downstream when the pass ends. You step back into the uniform life as if the time in town were a dream you stole from a richer man. The column forms south of the city and turns toward the long road. The violets in your hatband have dried to paper flowers. You keep them anyway. "Feels like we visited the world we're fighting for," Owen says, as the city recedes behind you. "Then we'd better get back to work," you answer, and your voice surprises you with how sure it sounds. Asterisk, the orders are thin and fast. March north, Pennsylvania. The word Pennsylvania slides into your ribs the way a knife would if it meant to save you. Sharp, necessary. The roads fill with men moving like weather. Wagons protest. Dust turns faces to cookies left too long in the oven. A field of wheat leans its ears toward your boots and forgives you for what you trample because you are standing between farms like it and a future that might not have room for wheat. You hear the thunder first on July 1st, a far rumble, like a drummer boy in a cellar. By the time you crest a low hill the next morning, the rumble has a name, a place to stand: Gettysburg. The town is a cluster of roofs with a steeple and a fate. The ground south of it rolls into a fishhook of hills and ridges that fit a defense like a glove. Men in blue stitch that hook, while guns find perches, and teams bring their stubborn iron children to positions with curses, kisses, and whips. Your brigade is sent to the left, where two humps of rock and trees are locals call them the round tops stand shoulder to shoulder like old brothers. Between them lie boulders as big as kitchens, strewn by an ancient tantrum and colonized now by saplings and the dreams of sharpshooters. Beyond, a peach orchard stands like a congregation dressed for Sunday, rows neat as a prayer. You take position behind a stone wall that seems to have been waiting your whole life for you to lean on it. The stones fit your palm like the handle of the plow you haven't touched in a year. Captain Pierce walks your company line, checking intervals and eyes as if both were part of the same kit. "Hold," he says, not loudly. It lands, anyway. Owen checks his cap. Jonah checks his humor and decides to leave it holstered today. The air hums with the prelude. Batteries, trade statements, boom there, boom here. Gunners mumbling to their guns like men calming horses. Across the open ground, the grey line forms, collapses, forms again, disdains, plays, tricks, and numbers end up being something your stomach believes before your head does. A courier rides up, mud to his knees, shouting before his horse has stopped. Pressure on the left. They're coming through the orchard. Hold that gap or the whole line bends. Words are pegs. You drive them in with your mind and tie yourself to them. They come. Through the peach trees, grey and butternut and dust and flags that make your eye believe there's order where you know there's only nerve. The orchard turns to a hive as canister shot combs the lanes, peaches falling like summer rain mixed with metal sleet. The first line breaks, the second keeps walking. Do not underestimate a man who keeps walking when the air itself is a saw. Steady, Captain Pierce says, and you feel your heart use the word like a rung. Take the flank as it shows. You fire by file instead of volleys, because the line is not a neat thing today. You have the sick, heady moment where you're certain you hit a man at 80 yards because he folds in the exact method your mind makes for that act. You feel both vindicated and robbed at once. Pressure mounts on your right, where the orchard empties into a wheat field gone ragged under 100 boots. The regiment to your right is chewed to a half measure and starts to bend back. There's that word the courier warned you of. Become a prophecy. Refuse the flank. The colonel crows, and you pivot the end of your line backward like a door on hinges made of men. Suddenly you are firing at foes in your front and your right. Jonah's voice near your hip. "Busy day," he says, and the laugh you bark is a strange bird flying up from brush to startle both of you back into breathing. The stone wall that held you becomes a suggestion as the grey tide pushes up and over. Hand to hand is not what anyone told you when they wrapped you in a flag at the courthouse and called it glory. It is eyes too close, breath too hot, noises that do not exist anywhere else in nature. Your bayonet finds purchase and then doesn't. Your rifle but cracks a jaw and hurts your own shoulder worse. You go down on your knees and scramble up because your knees aren't allowed today. A boy in grey, he is a boy. You can see the acne that no barber cut can cure brings his musket up with a kind of horrified courage. You think he has never cut a throat or a field. Owen's shot takes him in the chest, and he sits down like a man at a pond who changed his mind about swimming. You and Owen lock eyes, a heartbeat longer than a battlefield usually permits. Still with me, he says. You nod because words have been drafted elsewhere. A new sound climbs up the flank. The rebel yell, high and mad as foxes. It carries and breaks like glass. Men who've never heard it swear it's a ghost. You who have heard it know it's worse because it's human. The enemy line surges. Canister from the hill tears cords out of it. The surge becomes a shudder. A regiment rushes from your rear at a run fresh, faces a mix of fright and appetite. They slam into the grey side-on, and suddenly the orchard is a churn of someone else's problem, and your right is lighter, by grief and pressure and air dot for a gasp. You see the whole painting, the swell of Seminary Ridge with grey ants, the hook of Cemetery Ridge with blue ones, the angles and curves of tactics and fear, a flag falling and rising like a faith, tested and not exhausted. A drummer boy, too young to shave, hammering out courage on pigskin. A woman in a field hospital's doorway with bloody apron and a jaw like a captain. The picture is beautiful and ruined. You blink and it becomes a close-up again. A man in front of your muzzle whose decision will cancel yours if yours doesn't cancel his. First dot, by late afternoon, the infantry storm eases to Your line still stands, if staggered. Your mouth tastes like a cold stove. You have fired so many rounds that your shoulder will complain about it for a week in a voice you don't have to listen to but will. Men fall where they stood hours ago and become facts under the July sun. You move rails and stones, deepening the wall because tomorrow is a miser and men must save for it. Captain Pierce limps past, sleeve torn and stained, hat gone. They'll try the center tomorrow, he says. Not profit so much as gambler counting cards. We'll be sent if the line bows. The thought sits in your lap like a cat that may scratch. You pet it anyway. Owen sits on a boulder with the book of poems open to a page where a line about courage seems written by someone who died before he could get to the part about nausea. He reads it aloud and it's not bad. Jonah listens. Then says, I prefer the poem that goes beans, 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 but to each his own. You laugh because that's the kind of glue that holds men together when musket glue isn't being used. Night is a lanternless room full of breath and mutters. Wounded men lie between the lines and call for water and mothers and God sometimes, in that order. A few daring souls crawl out with canteens when the lines both go quiet, and there is a truce of a sort not written in any book. A hand from blue gives a sip to a mouth in grey. A hand in grey tips a canteen to a mouth in blue. Nobody shoots because the human argument outranks the political one in this thin hour. You lie awake and inventory the day. 10 things to be proud of, 10 to forget, 10 you will remember without choosing for the rest of your winters. Morning July 3rd arrives on a hot plate. The air is lead, the sun a tax collector. An unnatural hush sets in around midday and then shatters. The Confederate cannonade opens with a fury that steals the horizon. Over 100 guns pour their punishment into the Union center. The earth becomes a drum that your bones drum back. Your ears ring like that bell in the market town, only crueler. Whose idea was this century? You wonder, and then hate the thought for being clever, when it should be simple. Live. Hold. Breathe. You are marched at the double toward the center, then turned back by a courier with eyes like saucers. Hold the left. They're breaking on the ridge. You do as ordered and watch a mile away as a grey wave rolls out of the smoky tree line and walks into fire like it's an errand. Later the papers will call it Pickett's charge and draw neat lines on maps. From your stone wall, it looks like workmen ought not to be asked to do, and men do anyway because someone said forward. And they were taught what that word costs. They break. Because they must. Because math and iron have a stubbornness even brave men can't always outbid. The wave rolls back the way waves do when rocks refuse. Cheering rises and dies. Because you do not cheer a funeral when the deceased can hear you. Rain comes in the evening, small and perfect, washing the powder off your face and soaking into the ground that has more to drink than it should. You tilt your head back and open your mouth and taste July as it ought to be, clean and green. Jonah stands beside you, arms out as if the sky were his mother and the rain her apron. Owen smiles the way a man smiles when he has seen a thing worth writing down and lacks the words and is happy to lack them. The order comes at last like a hand on a hot brow. They're retreating. Men nod without noise. It isn't relief so much as a release, like a tight knot loosened a turn. You sleep on the ground behind the same stones that kept you back a long complaint that has learnt gratitude as a second language. Your last thought before the dream takes you is small and enormous at once. This wall was somebody's sweat in a spring 10 years ago. Today, it was our life. The world is made of tasks that seem small until they get asked big questions. You decide, somewhere below speech, to do the small tasks fierce when you find them again. Asterisk. The army decides to sit still, not out of kindness, but out of math. Roads that suck wagons to the hubs. Cornfields shaved to stubble. Men reduced by arithmetic no sermon can pretty up. Winter quarters 2 words that sound like a compliment until you build them with hands already split from cold dot. You learn to be a carpenter. The company's streets begin as muddy intentions and end as straight lines of huts with chimneys that draw only when they're begged. For men to a house. You and Owen claim a corner. Jonah stakes another and brings a blanket the color of coffee, which he calls curtains, and everyone pretends he's a duke. You cut saplings and notch logs until your forearms hum. Mud chinks the walls. Sticks mesh with clay to keep the wind where it belongs. A pane of glass is a miracle nobody can afford, so a square of oiled paper becomes a window. Sunlight through paper is a gentle thing, and the hut glows like a lantern when someone keeps the fire at a low, obedient crouch. They issue axes, and you learn what would will cooperate and what would argues. Pine splits like it wants to be useful. Oak makes you prove yourself. Hickory insults you and then rewards you with heat that holds on like an old friend. Stoves are dice with the quartermaster. Some get iron, some make do with stone and stubbornness. You get iron and spend the first night staring at it like it might run off. The surgeon and the colonel tour the new city with its smoky breath. The colonel approves drains dug right, gutters that actually leave camp instead of circle it like bad gossip. Dr. Abernathy approves nothing, because that is his job, but his mouth looks less pinched. Latrines are placed downwind and downstream like scripture says. For once, men follow a book when they can see where it leads. Mail finds you like a dog that knows its old route even after a new thunderstorm. Your mother's letter smells faintly of yeast and pages kept close to a stove. She writes of canning and quilts, of the neighbor boy breaking a colt, of a church meeting where Pastor Graves bowed his head a long time before he spoke, and people later said that silence was the sermon. She encloses a pair of socks with heels turned as if she could see your feet through the paper. Your father's note is short, fence held in the gale. I believe our corner posts those things we set deep. Before we knew, the weather saved us. You know he means more than boards and wire. The days develop a rhythm that feels almost like a life. Morning roll, would party, drill if the ground isn't a slick lie. Fatigue duty when it is. Letters in the afternoon if the mail wagon isn't belly up in some rut. A sutler opens a tent with shelf goods, arranged like dreams. Sardines, molasses, tobacco tin cups that shine like the moon. Prices are steep enough to make a colonel swear. But a tin of peaches becomes a sacrament 3 men share with spoons and silence. Asterisk. A choir appears. Not official, nothing official would sound like this. It's a knot of men who find their voices fit in a way that feels like a small proof in an unfriendly world. They practice at twilight near the chaplain's tent. Nearer, my God, to thee floats along the company street and settles in your hut like a guest who knows when to leave. You hum it later without trying, and the hum keeps pace with the tapping of rain on your roof of canvas and shingles begged from a barn. Snow comes once with a clean, forgiving hand that covers footprints like a mother pulling a blanket up to a chin. The camp goes quiet in that particular way snow asks for, the animal's breath, the small cheer of a stove, the distant thud of an axe. Men throw snowballs with the ferocity of those who prefer their battles without widows. A major catches a clump clean in his beard and laughs until his hat falls. And for a wedge of minutes the army is a village that's very bad at minding its dignity. Sickness still hunts. The measles finds the tents that have too many men from too many counties who never met until the recruiter made their acquaintance. Vaccination scars shine like medals on some arms. Others get their first dose and complain as if the prick offended their honor. Chloroform remains a daily spell in Dr. Abernathy's hands, and you thank a very practical God each time you see a man slip under instead of biting a leather strap. Christmas approaches the way. Calendars make it approach even when calendars feel like jokes. For days rumors crawl along the picket line. The boys in grey across the river are singing carols. They've got a banjo. Some sent a bottle over on a board. Your company draws the EV shift and tramps through crusted snow to the post farthest downriver, where an eddy makes the water talk to itself. At sundown the world hushes. The far bank, a darker smear under darker trees, sparks a small fire, an orange coin turned low. A voice drifts across, evening yanks, your sergeant, who can curse a fence into moving and never says good morning like a man who means it. Calls back, evening, rebs. The 2 words build a small bridge, light as breath. Then singing. Hark, the herald angels sing in a harmony that shouldn't work across water, but does. You join on your side in a verse nobody remembers the same and nobody minds. The river keeps both sets of voices and carries them off to a place where perhaps a woman sits by a window and wonders why tonight feels thick with something. A bottle floats down on a plank It bobs past your poster brave explorer and a private with good boots and better balance wades in up to his knees to snag it. Whiskey as raw as winter, passed in a tin cup along the picket. When it comes to you, you drink a mouthful and feel your chest go warm, then hot. You think of your father pouring cider at harvest and the way he always spilled a drop to the ground for those who aren't with us. You tip a splash into the snow and nobody laughs. Hey, Yank, someone calls. You got any papers? The sergeant tosses a folded Tribune onto a board and gives it a shove, aiming for a gentle current. It slides across and is caught by a hand you will never shake. A Richmond paper comes back the same way thin, sour with ink, full of victories that aren't quite true. Still, you read it. It's a window into a kitchen not unlike your mother's, a harmonica on their side, a fiddle on yours. The tunes step across the water like careful men on stones. For an hour there's a truce nobody wrote down, made by men nobody asked, held in place by the simple stubbornness of not tonight. The next morning the picket lines are ordinary again, eyes narrow, guns at the easy, orders hard as frozen earth. War resumes because it knows its job. But the memory remains like a hot coal you wrap in cloth and keep for later. Late in winter, a preacher who isn't your chaplain, Methodist, tall, with a Tennessee accent that makes even hell sound plausible, holds a revival in a stand of pines. Men come for the music and stay because he tells the truth about fear and sin. And he counts cowardice as a sin and calls mercy a duty and says God's grace is a river wider than the Rapidan. He dunks a dozen privates in water so cold they squeal like pigs and come up laughing and shouting. You don't go under, but you stand close enough to feel the spray and it does something to you that you can't argue with or explain. Supplies improve. Grant's name begins to ride the mail like a stamp that means things will arrive. More flour, better beans, coffee that resembles coffee, and orders. When the roads open, we move. No more dances back and forth. No more victories that look good in the morning paper and feel worse by the week's end. We will go until we are done or gone. On the last bitter night of March, Owen pulls the book of poems out from beneath his blouse and reads by grease lamp a thing about winter giving way to spring. His voice is quiet and not at all embarrassed. Jonah listens with his eyes closed, his feet propped near the stove, socks steaming gently. You think, if the world were built of hours like this work done, friends near, the roof clean of leaks, we would not need armies. You keep that thought. You will need it soon. Asterisk May arrives with green. And the army answers green with iron. Grant crosses the Rapidan, and the map takes you into a place that is not a forest so much as a tangle that forgot to grow upright. Second growth scrub, thickets of scrub, oak and pine, vines like traps, paths that go to men wide and then pretend they never existed. The place has a name that tries to warn you. The wilderness. You march into shade that smells of pitch and old rain. The road disappears. Guides argue with compasses and lose. Skirmishers go out and vanish into brush that hisses when touched. Gunfire finds the column not as volleys but as individual insults, single shots that make men drop mid-sentence. Officers curse the trees louder than the enemy. You learn quickly that dress is a fine idea on a parade ground and useless when the tree to your right is trying to wear your hat. The battle doesn't begin so much as erupt everywhere. You see blue along your flanks and then don't. You could throw a rock and hit a man in grey if you had a hand free to throw. A line is organized, not by flags, but by voices. You keep shouting your company's letter, and men shout it back, and that becomes the net that keeps you from falling out of your own side. Smoke pours among the trunks until the sun becomes a rumor. Powder flashes look like small, angry fireflies. You fire at sounds and movement, at buttons in glimpses, at a sleeve that jerks behind a pine. A private to your left takes a ball through the cheek and sits down in shock, holding his face as if it were a bowl he'd just dropped. Jonah drags him behind a blonde-down tree and stuffs a rag there and tells him stories about pie until his eyes decide staying open is an option. A shell hits brush and the brush ignites. Low and fast, like spilled lantern oil. The wind finds it and approves. Fire runs. In a minute the smoke has two colors. Wounded men cry out, and the cry changes because heat has arrived under them with a timetable nobody agreed to. You and Owen stamp at the edge with your hats, the most foolish, brave thing two men can do. And for a moment you beat back a gout of flame as if you were arguing with a mule. It feels like victory until the fire comes around from behind like a sneak. You fall back with the rest of the line. Not rooted, but wreathed. The ground in the narrow lanes becomes a churn of roots and ash. You cough until your ribs feel like someone is counting them with a stick from the inside. The air tastes of burnt needles and panic. Somewhere the enemy withdraws too, because fire is loyal to no flag. Amid the noise, a figure steps out of brush, 15 yards ahead, a Confederate, hatless, blood dark on his sleeve. You raise your rifle an inch as he raises his, and you both feel the ridiculousness of dying like dueling idiots in a place where even the trees want you dead. Water, he croaks, nodding at your canteen. You hesitate 1/2 of a Christian beat. Then you step forward as he steps forward, and you meet in a place that is neither side for a breath-long treaty. The canteen tilts. He drinks like a man who expected to walk a longer road. "Thank you, Yank," he says. You nod and say, "Tell your boys the fire's cutting behind them." He nods once a second treaty and disappears into scrub that swallows him like deep water. You reload without speaking of it. You will not write it in a letter, but it will live there anyway between God and your thumb. Fighting bends and bends and then snaps into a new place. You slog by feel, staying with Owen and the auditory fiction that a regiment remains a regiment. Night arrives and refuses to be restful. Skirmish fire winks at odd intervals like a sky of wrong stars. The wounded who can crawl choose directions by prayer. The wounded who can't lie with their palms upward as if willing dew to come to them, Captain Pierce, soot-streaked and hoarse, finds what's left of the company and fits it together like a carpenter rummaging a barn for enough good boards. He gives orders that are short because long ones are lies. Hold this bend of road. Do not pursue. Pour water on any spark. No one sleeps lying down. The men obey because disobedience here is death, and because Pierce hasn't asked stupid of you yet, and you love him for that. Sometime after midnight, the firing rolls away. The trees hiss with a mean satisfaction as embers continue their arithmetic in leaves and pine duff. You lean against a sapling and drift in a vertical sleep that would impress a mule. Dawn returns reluctantly, casting a thin light on trunks and men and the weird black lace the fire left. Dead bodies are baked dry in places, stiff in others, somehow too light and too heavy at once. Grant does not retreat. This is new. Other generals have danced back across rivers after days like this, have called a draw a lesson. Grant makes the army sidestep, and south, towards Spotsylvania, and even the crows watch with curiosity. "Where we going?" Jonah asks. "Forward," you answer. And though the word tastes like grit, it also tastes like purpose. Spotsylvania is a map of barns and fields and a courthouse where nobody settles much today. Earthworks grow like a second crop. Men shovel with the speed ponies with envy. The Confederates dig, too. Between the two ditches lives a space where things go to be destroyed. They call one curve in the line the mule shoe. And the name feels right the way nicknames feel right in families. Two on the nose to be argued with. Rain drums down steady as a scold, turning trenches to bathtubs and parapets to pudding. You load and fire, and the black powder pastes your face until you look like a miner who found war instead of coal. You aim at muzzle flashes like men did yesterday in the pines, and the smoke makes mysteries out of facts. Hours stretch into a biblical measure of time. Grant's orders keep coming. Pressure here, jam there, hold, hammer, hold. He is a man who believes persistence is a tactic. And you don't disagree because you're still here once, in a lull that isn't a lull. Owen pulls the poem book and tries a stanza, but the rain smears the ink and the paper tears under his wet fingers. Another time, he says, not angry, just tired of the world breaking. You lean shoulder to shoulder under a piece of torn canvas and decide that a poem is a thing you'll come back to. Like planting after flood by month's end. You have fought so many days in a row that the dates blur to grey. The difference between battle and march is merely the speed of your heart. The difference between alive and living is a list of small possessions. A dry pair of socks. A tin cup dented in a favourable place. A spoon without a splinter. A letter you haven't yet read because you're saving it for when the road goes steep. You sleep one night beside the road. Boots on, head on, haversack, with guns firing to your left and frogs singing to your right, and you think, I have been two kinds of animal in one day and neither complained. Asterisk. If the wilderness taught you that trees can be enemies, Cold Harbor teaches you that dirt can be. The ground here favors the men in grey like a landlord with favorites. They are entrenched on high ground behind works that look like an engineer's wedding. Logs notched and laid, headlogs on top to give a man somewhere to shoot from without gifting his eyes. You look across the shape of their line and you know, in the way a dog knows rain, that what is being asked of you is wrong and will be asked anyway. Grant asks for names on cards. The word comes down the line, matter of fact, as an order to stack arms. Write your name and unit on a slip and pin it to your blouse. Jonah says, to help the paymaster, and men laugh too loud. You print Eli Mercer, COD, 140th Ohio, in a hand that shakes. And you pin it above your heart with a needle borrowed from a man who learned to sew before he learned to shoot. Owen watches his own hand make his own letters and nods like he approves of good penmanship in any weather. On the morning, the assault forms in column not because it wants to, but because the ground insists. You can smell gun smoke before you see it. The air is thick with the rumour of iron. Bayonets fixed, Captain Pierce says, and the old familiar click runs like a mouse along a wall. Squeak dash squeak dash squeak. Keep your interval, move fast. When you reach their ditch, drop in and fire up. A colonel rides behind, hat off, hair a mess, a man who will not ask of others what he won't ask of his hat. He says something like for the Union, but it sounds like what it really means. Together or not at all. The world becomes acceleration. Forward is a whip crack, you go. The first 100 yards are a kind of miracle. No bullets seem to land where you are. You think, foolishly, that perhaps this time a map was wrong in your favor. Then the grey line speaks in canister and volleys, and the first rank folds as if a giant hand smoothed a tablecloth. You step over legs that never flinch again. You stumble into a man whose face is newly organized by a ball, and your body decides to ignore it until later, because now is not later. 50 yards, 25. Men go down not singly but in a sheet. The ditch is at your toes. Some get in, some fail and lie on the edge, as if listening for something. You drop into the ditch beside Owen and discover it is not shelter but a place with less wind. Bullets scythe the air above like clever locusts. You load by feel because sight is a luxury. You raise and fire at a head peeping from behind a headlog, and the head vanishes and you decide not to know if that was success or courtesy. The assault fails in the exact way it always fails in the stories told by men who were not there to neat by half. Here it fails like a shelf collapsing at 3 points, with splinters, with shouts that go from forward. 2 names, loose, hard, Mercer. You hear your name in Jonah's voice and answer because that's what names are for. Hours pass in the ditch. Men bury their faces in the bank to dream of being dirt. Water bottles are empty by mid-morning. The sun climbs like it's been told to get somewhere. You tear a corner off the book of poems and twist it into a plug for a hole in your canteen. Owen smiles at you as if you've invented a new kind of courage. Book saves life, he says. Poet would be pleased. Poet would complain about the taste. You answer, and you each allow yourself the quietest grin a ditch has ever held. At some point, a man lifts a white scrap on a stick handkerchief, shirt. Surrender of this specific square foot of earth for a minute tanned. The firing pauses not everywhere, but enough that stretcher bearers scuttle in like water bugs. You and 2 strangers rise on elbows and drag a boy back by the armpits, the way you'd move a sack of feed that hates to be lifted. And when you lay him down, he grabs your wrist and whispers, "Ma," and the 3 of you become a single thing that wants one woman who is nowhere near this ditch. Then the white scrap drops somehow, and the air goes to knives again by afternoon. Orders come that feel like forgiveness and sound like wind through corn. Disengage where you can. Hold where you can't. You and Owen ooze backward along the ditch, then sprint in a crouch toward a fold in the ground that passes for a hill. Bullets sound like bees with grudges. A shell lands behind and lifts your feet with a rude hand. You land hard and laugh because you are not in pieces. Then Owen jerks and sits and says, very calmly, "My leg." Blood blooms through his trouser on the outside of his thigh, in an outline that looks like a map of some place you'd rather visit. You drag him to a low place and tear cloth. The way training made you practice when training thought practice could prepare a man to be a human tourniquet. The ball has gone through, meet only by some luck. You cinch his belt above it, and he swears in a tone that respects the language. You're not walking this off, you say. You're riding, and you wave for a stretcher with a hand you didn't know was steady. 2 men in aprons appear, not like angels, but like mules that just keep coming, and they take him and promise nothing. He squeezes your fingers until your bones protest. "Don't," he says. "Do anything dumb." Never once, you lie. When night finally wins. Cold Harbor is a bad dream the earth had and can't forget. Men lie between the lines, calling for water in accents you could map to counties. The order comes, whispered like sin. No movements. No rescue, and yet a shape slides out one of yours with a canteen. And then a shape from their line, and for 20 minutes the night practices being human. You crawl a few yards with your canteen and tip it to a mouth in grey. The man sputters, then sighs. I reckon we both got business elsewhere, he says. Tomorrow, you answer, and you mean everything and nothing. The next day, Grant sends a note to Lee to ask a truce so the dead can be gathered. The note goes tardy by couriers and pride. The sun ruins more than it should. When flags finally sprout along the works, men move into the field with blankets and carts and faces that have nothing left to hide. You help carry the man you shot yesterday and don't know you did. And you say his name out loud because his card stayed pinned and the ink didn't run. Asterisk. The rumor that rides in the evening, the one that says the army will not withdraw, will slide south, instead arrives and lodges. You expect to hate it. You don't. Motion means purpose. Purpose means sanity. You miss Owen already. You write his mother a letter you've been writing in your head for months without realizing it. He is brave, you say, and then cross it out because it's too small. He is good, you write, and it's still small, but true in a way that lets you fold the page without swearing. Jonah sits beside you and counts the men from your company, who stood in line last week and won't stand again. He stops at 9 because 9 is as far as his throat will let him go. You still with me? He finally asks. Still, you say. The word is a nail you tap into good wood. Asterisk. South to the James. The army pulls a trick with boats and bridges that would make a magician blush. You cross on a pontoon that moves under your boots like a horse that resents you. The river is wide as a story. The far bank is Petersburg, and beyond that Richmond, and beyond that finally. Grant intends to cut lifelines instead of throats for once railroad tracks. Warehouses, the exact places that turn crops into rations. Lee sees it and meets you with trenches that unroll like a bad ribbon across miles. You dig until your hands learn a new alphabet. Sap, rollers' great wicker drums go in front while men scoop earth like men who have remembered they were once moles. Parapets rise. Traverses notch the line to keep a shell's breath from walking too far. The sharpshooters, on both sides, learn each other's slouch. A cap cresting a berm earns a whistle of lead. You keep your head down and your humor up and your coffee in the dark because a daylight fire is an obituary. Siege life teaches small arts. You become a connoisseur of shelter halves and how to cart them so rain chooses the ground instead of your blanket. You learn that salt pork fried with flour becomes something almost not an insult if you don't ask what the flour used to be. You master the coffee sieve, made of a sock you swore to your mother you would keep dry. You trade tobacco for news, news for nails. Nails for a spoon with an actual bowl and not a guess at one. At the end of August, a runner comes with a letter in a hand you recognize. Before the name hits your eyes, Owen, hospital paper, ink thin as tea. I walk crooked, but proud. A nurse says my language would shame the devil, and I told her the devil taught me. Tell Jonah that laugh of his woke 2 men from anesthesia. Tell Captain Pierce I'm not done, he writes. You show it around, and an entire company reads it like a hymn. The world is large enough to hold a man and his friends in separate places and not let them fall through. One late blue evening, Captain Pierce calls you to the company street. He holds something small that glints. Mercer, he says, and the way he says it makes you stand straighter. You've been acting like a sergeant for months. Time, the brass caught up. The bar in his palm looks like nothing. It weighs more than your rifle because it's made of expectations. He pins it to your blouse where your name card once sat, and Jonah whoops like a boy at a fair. Sergeant Mercer, he says in a tone that will annoy you, until it warms you. Leadership is not just shouting with a fancier mouth. It's knowing who has blisters, and who hides a cough, and who must be told twice, and who must be asked once. It's making sure Simmons gets coffee before he picks up a shovel because he will shovel double if he drinks first. It's making Corporal Vance swap places with Private Caffrey because Caffrey's fear makes him fire too high unless someone whispers his name every other volley. It's writing 3 letters to 3 mothers on the same night and meaning each one separately. You were a boy when you set out. You are not done being a boy sometimes. Your heart still does dumb, but you are something else too. A small hinge in a big door. The siege is punctured by wildness. The mine, the crater, blows up a fort on a humid July dawn with a bang that invents new kinds of silence after it fades. The assault into that hole becomes a hellscape you do not see from your scepter, but hear about in fragments and dreams. You hold your peace a line and consider yourself lucky in a way that feels like a thief's prayer. In the fall, raids cut rails and seize depots. The army keeps pressing. The ring tightens. Winter, without moving, is a different kind of heart than last year's. The huts are better, because you know how now. The roofs leak less, because you are less patient with a drip. The sanitary rules are followed because a man loves his gut more after losing friends to its rebellion. Packages come with knitted mittens and cakes that taste like historical reenactments of cake. You read books that never would have sat in your hands at home. Plutarch by a smoky light, a manual on surveying that makes you think in angles, a ragged newspaper serial about an orphan who always lands on his feet. You write your mother and father with a calm hand that would have scared you last year. You do not mention the night you watched a man bleed out quietly because his body had decided to be privacy again, and you sat with him. Anyway, so privacy could have company. Spring returns like an appointment kept out of stubbornness. Sheridan rides. Sherman writes letters from places you thought were myths. Lee's line grows thin enough to see through. You can feel the last threads tugging. In April, the order comes that tastes like mint. Press you do. The works in front of you are empty in places, noisy in others. A kind of music of a band packing up at the end of a long night. Petersburg cracks. Richmond empties. Fires bloom where no one asked them to. You march on roads that were closed a week ago by force of will. The men move as if someone lightened their packs without touching them. At Sailor's Creek, a chunk of Lee's command shatters against Grant's insistence. You take prisoners who look like you did in '63 and you give them water because your canteen doesn't know how to be political. Then the word that makes every bugle in the world sound small. Appomattox. You arrive not at the courthouse door but near enough to feel the day turn. Flags meet in a yard. Men who've aged wrong in 4 years sit at a table and write American on a piece of paper in a way that makes the word new. You stand with your company and listen to nothing for the first time since your boots met mud. Some men cheer. Others sit down and cry like their ribs cracked. Jonah does both in that order. You stare at your hands and are surprised to find them empty. The marching doesn't stop on a dime because nothing honest does. You go to the city that burned and see chimneys like black teeth and women staring at you with eyes you can't read. You move to a camp where the orders are less about killing and more about counting. Rifles are stacked. Men are paroled. Mules are listed with the care of children. You take the oath again because the country you're keeping is not the country you left, and it needs to hear your voice on purpose. Muster out is a dance of ink, stamps, handshakes that aren't sure how to be formal after becoming real. They pay you in greenbacks that smell like varnish and promise a whole new experiment in wallet arithmetic. You board a train with a dozen men who were strangers and now can read your footfall in the dark. The countryside slides by in colors that somehow never changed even when everything else did. Ohio green is a real shade. You can point at it with your chin out the window and say to nobody, "We're close." You walk the last mile because a man should, and also because the train doesn't run that far. The lane to the farm is to ruts and a weedy middle that looks like it missed you and grew lonesome. The fence your father mentioned in his winter letter stands straight. You put your hand on a corner post and feel how deeply it sits. Your mother sees you first. There is a plate in her hand when she recognizes your walk. There is no plate a second later. Your father comes out from the barn, wiping his palms on a rag that will never be clean enough now. He doesn't say your name because his mouth has other work. He does say, "Well," and the word is built out of 27 kinds of relief. They hold you and you hold them, and none of the three of you pretends not to cry because you are all out of pretending. That night you sleep in a bed that remembers you. It is too soft and exactly right. You wake twice with your hand reaching for a rifle that isn't there. And the second time you keep your eyes open and locate the gentle sounds of home. A branch tapping a window. A mouse regretting a particular crumb. The old clock downstairs that forgot the war and kept time just the same. You smile in the dark, which is a thing you had forgotten how to do without reason. In the weeks that follow, you discover the country is better at parades than at stitching people back into their former seams. Men in blue march down Main Street while boys climb lamp posts and women wave handkerchiefs, and that is as it should be. The day after, you try to put a plow in the ground and find that the soil turns in a way your hands know but your heart startles at. Old Mr. Kent from 3 farms over asks you if the red bayonets were as wicked as they say, and you say they were men like us, and he looks confused because your answer does not fit his story. Pastor Graves preaches on peace with a voice that shakes and a prayer that doesn't, and after he puts a hand on your shoulder as if he is borrowing strength and lending it in the same gesture. You write to Owen, now in a hospital ward in Philadelphia, employed unofficially as a teacher of boys whose bodies haven't decided yet whether to keep pace with their hopes. He writes back stories of nurses with tempers and men who learn to walk with sticks like they were born to dance with partners. You write to Jonah, who has decided to apprentice with a printer because he wants to put words on paper and send them places that need them. He sends you a broadside he set himself. Returned soldier starts new life. And you laugh because he always did enjoy titles. Sometimes at dusk, you take a walk to the creek that held your boyhood summers. You stand on the bank where roots make a lace of earth and watch water negotiate rocks. The frogs tune up. A hawk writes a sentence against the sky and you fail to read it and feel that this is fine. You take your father's knife, the one he pressed into your hand on the day you were too young and had to be older, and you carve nothing into the bark of a sycamore because the tree owes you nothing and you owe it your silence. You will not be the same again. That is the bad news and the good. You will carry names like smooth stones in a pocket. Run your thumb over them when the year turns loose. Hart, Simmons, that boy in butternut with the ring. The man in grey who drank from your canteen, the nurse with the iron voice. Captain Pierce, who taught you that orders are also mercy when made of sense. You will sit in church some Sundays and find your breath catch when the choir hits a note that sounds like a bugle a half-mile off. You will put your hand on the kitchen table in a sudden need to feel wood that doesn't splinter under shells. Your mother will put her hand over yours and not ask. And that will be medicine. One day, years ahead, you will return to a field the government kept and called sacred, because fields are forgetful and needed help remembering. The stone wall will still be there. The wind will still be indecently free. You will walk with men who say we and mean boys in two colors, who did what was asked on the worst day and then went on somehow. You will touch a name carved into a monument and say it out loud, because mouths are the only monuments that matter in the end. You will go home then, real home, and find someone has set a pie on the sill to cool. You will tie up an old horse and rub her nose and feel that animals forgive faster than people, and thank God for that. You will eat, and the pie will be too sweet, because life is, when allowed. You will wash up at the pump and the water will run cold enough to bite, and you will grin because you know every other kind of water, too. You will step into a house that remembered you even when you forgot the exact sound of your own name. And when you sleep that night, the winter stars will sit on the tin roof like coins, and they will be honest again. And you will be a man who has learned that the worst thing can happen, and the morning still comes, and men can meet it together. You will know, in the part of you that learned how to say still, that this was what it was actually like: fear and friendship, mud and music, hunger and kindness, work and faith, and a long road that kept being walked until it stopped needing to be. Asterisk.